Well, it's good to be with you guys this evening. Of course, I'm in a rush. COT has an overload in geoactivity. So that kind of redirected my talk for tonight, somewhat. Not all the way. And I won't keep you long. You guys have to get rest and prepare for whatever you have to prepare for. Things are busy in the world. So let me ask you guys something tonight. How many of you all have a little trepidation or an eerie feeling about volcanoes? How many? Because I want to walk you guys through a process, a small process, so that you understand what we are facing. I'm not going to say could be facing. I'm going to say what we are facing. What we are facing. 37 says maybe I should change my name to geoactivity. It would be in an appropriate time. It would be. I mean, it's happening all over the place, and we are overwhelmed with geoactivity. I have deep concerns about the Ring of Fire. Deep concerns. The entire Ring of Fire. Not just one little tiny spot. The whole thing. Right? The whole thing. So I'm going to walk you guys through a process of something that happened a long time ago. I suspect those who live in Washington and Oregon, British Columbia, down to the Gulf of California, Los Angeles, and those places, all the way over to Papua New Guinea, Australia, the Philippines, of course, and Japan. We're going to have some issues. We're going to have some issues. Plate tectonics is a big deal because there's a phenomena happening. And historically, when this phenomena takes place, you can bank on it, right? In fact, in the 90s, when I was in the middle of the Gulf War, I had a colleague who was in the States, and we would always comb over information and data. 1991, everything changed. And it certainly began my pursuits in watching geoactivity back in 1991. And of course, the USGS was involved, and the Air Force was involved. I'm going to discuss some of that with you guys tonight so that you can understand that process. I'm also troubled by a couple of dreams, troubled by them. One in particular, the one I share with you guys about the auroras in the sky, and what they represented outside of what people suspected. So I'll be going over that tonight, right? I'm going to get some water, come right back. We're going to start, and I hope that you guys can glean some good info tonight. Here's why. If you know the process of something, then you can watch for yourselves and evaluate what's actually taking place. You can do that, okay? So I'll be right back to share this with you guys in just a few seconds. Hey, everybody, let's get started, shall we? All right, before I begin, how many of you don't know about volcanoes? This will allow me to get nerdy if necessary. You guys know about them, right? You know that we have Italy is in a dilemma right now. But again, I suspect from the readings, we have the entire Ring of Fire to deal with. That's not a good thing. But again, the more you understand about volcanoes. Better off you are. Better off. I know I certainly was when I knew the processes pertaining to it. I'm moving things around, guys. It's somewhat hot here. There we go. But so let's cover something. Because we have seaborne volcanoes, right? We have a couple of risers happening right now and domes forming in several places. It is the entirety of the Ring of Fire. The entirety. So let me point you guys back to 1990. I think it was around 1991. I helped a colleague look at some data, and of course, everybody was looking at it. But in our conversation, something was happening in the Philippines, right? Something that nobody suspected that would happen. See, because there are certain volcanoes that do not look like volcanoes. They look like mountain ranges. This brings California to mind, Northern California, going into Oregon, right? All the way up to Seattle. That's what it brings in mind, because some of those mountainous areas are just like another area that was in the Philippines. The area I'm talking about is Mount Pinatubo. You guys remember that? No one knew about Mount Pinatubo, that it would erupt. The Filipino geologists were under-equipped in that area, right? But of course, when it began to activate, it changed everything everybody knew about volcanoes. The water underneath that range of mountains, it began to boil. Steam was coming up from the mountains. It began to produce 500 earthquakes per day. Tiny earthquakes per day. And this was only after the USGS took equipment down there so they could monitor it. When this happens, when steam rises, normally it's from acidic magma and basaltic magma, right? Pretty good mixture, superheating the water, right? Causing steam to go up in these chambers. That should have been the first indication. They begin to watch at that point. And this volcano just continued to produce earthquakes. Now imagine a bunch of earthquakes around mountain ranges. Sound familiar? Just a bunch of tiny earthquakes around mountain ranges. It's very difficult, even now, to look down into the ground at some of the rocky terrain and mountainous regions in the USA, for example, due to the nature and the strata that's in those mountains, the rock layers. Nevertheless, the magma chamber they found in Mount Pinatubo, right below that, was about 90 cubic kilometers. You know, that's around 55 cubic miles. That's big, right? Think about that. 55 cubic miles. A cubic mile has a mile on one side of it. So think of a cube, all sides being equal, having one side a mile long. That's a cubic mile. So imagine something that has a volume below it, a magma chamber of 55 cubic miles or 90 cubic kilometers. That's quite big, right? That's very big, very big. The emissions of sulfur dioxide, that was a key, right? Because the sulfur dioxide, it was produced in low numbers, and that, in fact, that's one of the gases. We have sensors all over the place, as many places as we can place them to monitor sulfur dioxide. In this case, Mount Pinatubo, back in 91, began to produce 500 tons per day. 500 tons, that's what the measurement was, right? Now, clearly, that indicates an eruption is approaching. It doesn't always indicate an eruption is imminent, but certainly approaching, right? And of course, to get these readings, you have to take a spectrometer from the ground and measure the clouds and anything that's going over top. And you start to pick up these emissions. That's, and right now, that's building all over the place. Everywhere. And no, you're not going to hear this in other reports. You're not going to hear this until it happens. There's no way they could warn anybody that this indicates an absolute eruption, right? They can't do that. Number one, because evacuations, if they are premature, they normally kill people and they wreck a person's life, right? And of course, if they're late calling an eruption, and there actually is one, the same thing happens. But the emissions rate back in 1991 began to rise. That's when they bought the U.S. Army in and the USGS in. And they began to set up equipment to monitor these and, other readings. Clark Air Force Base was in that vicinity at the time, and General Kamen, very capable guy. He was called upon to call some pretty, he had to call the shots on an evacuation, and that's not an easy call, right? I believe the base at the time had about 15,000 soldiers, and they had to be, ultimately, they were evacuated, right? They were ultimately. There were about 300,000 people that lived around that same area. And ultimately, they had to be evacuated, unfortunately. Continue to go through it. And then, of course, that famous call came through. Now, it was myself, some others on that line talking, but the volcano actually erupted on a Wednesday. That was a Wednesday at about 8:51. And it sent an umbrella ash cloud up to about 15 miles. 15 miles. That's a pretty big one, right? Once the volcano, right, that magma comes up through that chamber, it develops at the top. It's kind of like squeezing a toothpaste tube, right, where you have this cumulative effect of debris that solidifies at the top of a volcano. Now, it's not shooting out at first, right? It starts to raise everything around it. That was observed. And then, of course, after that, it blew. That was in June 12th. You would think that would be the end of it, because that eruption was pretty big. That was pretty big. But that was only the beginning. So take note of that. You have these gases, these emissions that steadily build, right? You have almost a pulse of magma movement inside the earth. The magma chamber is often, it can be obscured from all sight for a long time. Then, of course, when it erupts, you always have these precursors for the most part. You have a lot of water. In this case, around the ring of fire, you would have water because you'd have that acidic and basaltic magma mixing together with just molten rock, shooting all that up, right? That can cause lots of damage. Kind of like in Italy. Everybody's over there taking pictures, right, of the ash going up. That's not a very smart thing to do because it could indicate a real eruption, a real one, right? Somebody says sort of clogged it up before erupting. Yeah, it will. It will build up, and that material at the top solidifies. But the magma keeps going up that small chamber. Normally it's a tiny chamber at first, until it reaches a point when that water and steam bursts through the ground, goes straight up in the air, sending some umbrella cloud up to a pretty big height. Same thing happens in the oceans. Same thing. So that's an indicator. This can be damaging. This can, cost a lot of lives. But that wasn't it. That was not it, because on 3 days later, June 15th, at around, I believe, 1:40 p.m., the biggest eruption in modern times hit in that area, right? It sent a column of lava and ash and molten rock in the air. It created these convection columns that went up 250 miles in diameter. That's how big it was. That's how big this umbrella ash cloud was, 250 miles in diameter and about 25 miles high. I mean, a lot of debris went straight up. It went straight up. As it did this, it went all the way up to the stratosphere, right? Once this gas and these rocks and everything else, once they reach the stratosphere, they're pulled down by their own weight, by gravity, in effect, right? So all that material collapsed on its own weight. It was traveling at about 1,500 degrees, traveling at about 120, right? Almost terminal velocity, about 120 miles an hour. And so, of course, debris overwhelmed the lands at that point. So that's your pyroclastic flow, and that's also debris coming straight down on people's heads. So you had a lot of pumice in the area, and that pumice got up to about, I think it was, some pieces were, 12 inches, because it got bigger and bigger. Same thing. This same process will likely happen around the Ring of Fire. And it's going to happen in more than one place, not just one place. Don't look at one location, because the entirety of the Ring of Fire is overcharged. It is overcharged. And what they saw in Mount Pinatubo back in 1991 will probably be on the smaller scale compared to what could be released. I'm going to go ahead and say what will be released around the Ring of Fire, right? So you're looking at, can you imagine ash? Can you imagine a 1,500 degree cloud of ash coming in your direction? That's what we're facing. That would absolutely dephase all the lands, right? It's probably why most civilizations, hear me on this, most civilizations, when you start digging in the dirt, you find this big ash layer around these civilizations, people frozen in position like Pompeii, right? You find this, after they excavate a few hundred feet, you find it gets lower, you find more, you find more, you find more, you find more. So this has happened multiple times on this planet, multiple times on this earth. Mount Pinatubo was a special case also, because when it went off, June 15, 1991, they didn't have aerial coverage to see the storms and satellite things. And so guess what? A typhoon was headed right for Mount Pinatubo at the exact same time. That's unbelievable, isn't it? At the exact same time. So some parts were devastated even more, because it had, had 120 mile an hour winds. That was an actual typhoon. It was like right out of a Hollywood movie. The point being that no one saw this coming. No one. It's something you cannot anticipate until it begins to happen. And so in 2025, what do we have? We have those same things happening right now. Right now, all around the ring of fire. Right now, we have that. If we had one to go up in the ocean, it would do just as much damage. Just as much. That the same amount of material would likely be ejected from it. Oh, and by the way, once it erupts, right, that chamber that releases the magma in the first place, that big tube that goes straight up, gets much wider. That's when you have the real eruption. The first one, that's when magma begins to flow. The second one, that's when the real magma is released. Magma in high volume is released. All of you believers in Christ, so you know that something similar to that is going to take place a few times. We know that this event has happened multiple times in the past. It does not guarantee the end of the world. No, it doesn't. Because a continent could be taken out, a few of them, and does not mean that everything stops. It does not mean it's the end of the world. It just means we're in a pretty challenging predicament, and lots of lives are lost. See, because at some point we're going to have to entertain that a lot of people are not on the earth anymore. At some point. At some point, something will happen to the people, whether by disease, whether by geology, whether by solar activity. And by the way, I have something to tell you about the sun tonight. I want you guys, to have this information so that you can understand it. I'll likely go into detail as probably as I talk to Pastor Paul a little more and things develop a little more. It's going to be a lot more to come forward. There's going to come a time when no children are on this earth. Now imagine that. How long would humanity have if no children were on the earth? I believe that's coming. I believe that's coming quick. In fact, I believe that many people are going to find themselves sterile shortly. And do you know why? Because for some reason, leadership and greedy corporations play around with your health and experiment. They always experiment. As these wars and contentions and fights and threats of fighting, as it rises, people love to blame somebody. They like to blame somebody, right? Like there are people out there blaming Israel right now. As we inch closer to Israel's operation against Iran and two other places, as we inch closer to that, you find a lot of people pointing their finger at Israel. They say it's the Jews, just like in the days of old. You know your Father's doing that on purpose. That's why in the Bible, what did God say? I'm going to gather all armies around Jerusalem, around Israel. God said he would do it. God said he would bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. God said he would plead with them there. So let me give you a heads up, just so you understand. When all the people of the earth send their army representations to the Middle East, and they're surrounding the valley of Jehoshaphat, and in the valley of Jehoshaphat, listen to me carefully, God will plead with them there. Now in the Bible it tells us how God pleads with fire, with smoke, with great hail, with brimstone. That's how he pleads. He pleads with devastations. So what does that tell us as a whole? That when you see these people encamped around Israel, God is about to plead with them. That means the sky is about to fall. That means get ready for blood to drop to the earth. Get ready for great hail stones and stones that are on fire to fall to the earth. Get ready. There's going to be an outbreak. You ever think of it that way? We're not talking about the end. We're talking about when people get down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Lord have mercy. You can watch that on the news every single day of your life. You've been seeing it year after year that more and more military personnel are being sent to the Middle East for one reason or another. And they're centralized around one little tiny area. All policy surrounds one little tiny area. What area is that? Israel. 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 Now, just a short recap, though. You guys understand the process, the general process of a volcano in regards to the ones with a big magma chamber below them, right? Mount Pinatubo. Do some look into that, Mount Pinatubo. Try to find something that shows you a timeline or something of how that took place. Because we'll see that again, especially on the west coast of the USA. Well, China is going to see the same thing. Japan is going to see the same thing. All around the Ring of Fire. All around it. Do you know what happens when ash? There's a certain type of ash, and I know we have black volcanoes, right? They shoot out what looks like spider webs and some other material that comes out of them. But once you have a certain volume of material in the atmosphere, right, it will drop back down to the earth. And it will look just like red blood, not because it's red blood. No. Because of the material that's in the rock or the pumice or whatever the case is, all those gases and everything else, they get encapsulated in both ice and rock and dust. And when they fall back down to the earth, it looks like blood just dropped everywhere. The volcanoes are one thing, but we have another problem. You guys have heard me talk about the heliosphere a few times now. Right? Do you not know it's collapsing? As we're speaking right now, it's collapsing. Our heliosphere is collapsing. Do you guys know what that means? It's collapsing. We're talking about is fallen by big chunks, like that big chunk that's not being covered right now where galactic cosmic rays are coming through a big hole. And another hole is forming. And that's continuing. Do you know that means exotic radiation of a type we're not used to? Numbers. I'll be back in a few minutes. You're right at the back door. You're at the back door. Forget if we did not have a war, if we didn't have trade issues and all this other stuff, you would only have a window of time to get things together. This day is so precious. So we still have this moment.